Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zakir Jacob. So the killing of Hardeep Nijjar, which has started this diplomatic firestorm between India and Canada, is getting curiouser and curiouser. Nijjar's son spoke to Canadian media where he said that his father used to have regular meetings with the Canadian intelligence officials, virtually one or two every week. And in those meetings, he was often warned about how there was a threat to his life. Why was he not given protection then? That's one large question that Canadian intelligence officials should be clarifying. And the other is that Hardeep Singh Nijjar was a man against whom there was an Interpol red corner notice. What were Intel folks doing, hanging around a person who had a red corner notice, giving him advice, asking him to stay in, rather than doing what they're supposed to do, which is to arrest anyone by law who has a red corner notice against him? Should Justin Trudeau clarify on these questions before making such dramatic and public allegations against India? It's been 10 days since he did that, and yet there is not an iota of proof to those quote-unquote credible allegations which has been put out either in the public domain or been shared in private with India. But first, the story.
Nor must be countenanced that political convenience determines responses to terrorism, extremism, and violence. When reality departs from the rhetoric, we must have the courage to call it out. Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust. This is very much the sentiment of the global south.
All right, so here are some of the revelations made by Hardeep Singh Nijjar's son. He spoke to the Vancouver Sun as well as other Canadian media. This is what he said, that Nijjar met Canadian intelligence officials regularly. In fact, he goes on to say Nijjar, when he was alive, had at least one or two meetings every week with Canadian intelligence CSIS officials. Now, these meetings started in February of this year, and it increased over a period of time. In the following weeks, there were more meetings than when they initially started. He also said that they met, Nijjar last met Canadian intelligence officials 6 days before his death. The next meeting was 2 days after his death. Now, Nijjar was informed by these CSIS officials about the threats to his life. Now, remember, here was a man who had threats to his life. He had a Interpol red corner notice against him, and Canadian officials were sort of hanging around with him. Meanwhile, another meet with intelligence officials was scheduled. Like I said, this is what his son is claiming, that it will be 2 days. It was supposed to happen 2 days after he died. Intelligence officials apparently advised Nijjar to stay at home. So why was he driving alone in a car on the day that he got killed, on the night that he got killed? Why was he driving alone in a car? It does ask some very simple but very basic and pertinent questions, basis this interview that Nijjar's son has given to the Vancouver Sun. Number one, the big question is, if indeed Canadian security officials, intel officials believed that Nijjar's life was under threat, why was he not provided security? The Washington Post story which came out yesterday said that Nijjar, when he died, he was alone in the car. Were these threats and the inputs of these threats, were they deliberately ignored by Nijjar and his family and his close aides? Because he had nobody else protecting him when he died, certainly. Was Nijjar drawn out? Did he get a call? Or what is it that forced him to come out and take his car at that time? It was about 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the night when he got killed on the 18th of June. Was he drawn out by someone he knew or by some associate and then murdered? Why was the police reaction? This is again something that the Washington Post story said. It took 20 minutes for the Surrey police to reach the scene of crime, and once they reached there was this jurisdictional battle between them and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as to who is going to take the lead on this case. Also, before any of this was done, before any of this preliminary inquiry established anything in a prima facie fashion, why did Justin Trudeau go public with the accusations that he made against India so publicly in the Canadian Parliament about 10 days ago? Let me now go across to our guests and try and make sense of this story. Kash Heed is a former Canadian Minister for Public Safety. He's joining us from Vancouver. Vivek Kajju is former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. We're also joined by Gurmat Grewal, who is a former Conservative Member of Parliament, and Michael Kugelman will be joining us. He's Director of the South Asia Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Centre. Kash Heed, if I could ask you to weigh in on the questions that I laid out, basis what Mr. Nijjar's son told the Vancouver Sun. Why was he, if he was meeting Canadian intelligence officials virtually once or twice a week, A, why did he not have any kind of police protection? And B, what were these intel folks doing hanging around a guy against whom there was an Interpol red corner notice?
Well, let me start out by saying there's a lot of misinformation that's out there right now. There's a lot of allegations, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that are being played out at this particular time. We have several people under threat in Canada, whether it's related to criminal organization or criminal activity or some other type of activity. Police forces and police agencies, intel agencies have an obligation to inform people when they receive information that there's a public safety risk to them. And they're obligated to share that information with them, but that's all they're obligated to do. They're not really necessarily obligated to offer them protection, just to give them some advice and give them some comfort that they're aware of this to a certain extent. You got to remember, and I've done this before in notifying people that they're under threat, is people will continue with their daily patterns of life. They think they're invincible and nothing's going to happen to them. And that's a common practice with a lot of people you advise that are under threat. Mm-hmm. So again, we only have Nijjar's son, who's going through probably some post-traumatic stress as a result of his father dying, but there's, people are amplifying some of the things that are happening. We don't know that that's factual. We're making some assumptions there, and we're speculating on what may occur. But I can tell you right now, law enforcement has a duty, as imposed in Canadian law here and with our court system, and they undertook that particular duty that they had. They don't necessarily.
What about the second part of my question, Mr. Heed?
Stop the individual.
Yeah. What about the second part of my question? What were these intel folks doing, hanging around a person against whom there was an Interpol red corner notice virtually once or twice a week, as per what his son told Canadian media?
It's regardless of what your propensity for violence may be, or whether you're under some type of other allegation here, they still have the obligation to notify that individual that they are part of intelligence that's indicating there may be a threat to their life, regardless of what your background is.
Even if you have an Interpol red corner notice against you?
Even if you have an Interpol notice against you, a red flag.
Okay. Vivek Kajju, do those answers convince you on both these counts? Because, our viewers are watching this, and I'll leave it to their better judgment, but I find it rather bizarre on both of these counts. If indeed he had threats to his life, as is being claimed, why was he not given any security? Here in India, if someone, particularly a public figure, if he or she is, there is credible intelligence to back that he or she has a threat to his or her life, then you give them security. That's what you do. So why was that not done in this case? Does the answer from Mr. Heed, add up? And two, the question about, you have an Interpol red corner notice against you, and yet these guys are not arresting him, which my understanding is anybody who's a signatory and who's part of the Interpol group of countries, you are mandated, the law enforcement in that country is mandated to arrest such and such a person if there is a red corner notice.
As far as your first observation is concerned, it concerns really Canadian practice, and Mr. Heed is in a better position to answer that. Maybe it is their practice not to give protection. In India, certainly, if there is credible indication or credible information that the life of a person is under threat, then there is an obligation on the part of the state agencies, security agencies, to give some kind of protective cover. But what is the Canadian practice? It is for Mr. Heath to answer, and practices differ from country to country.
And
Now
Interpol
the second part of your question is, as far as we are concerned, a serious question, and it goes to the very heart of the issues between India and Canada, and that is that the Canadian system simply has not as yet taken Indian concerns regarding Khalistani supporters, people against whom there are terrorist charges, seriously enough. And the fact that there was a red corner notice against Nijjar, in the normal case, should have activated the law enforcement system in Canada to take action in accordance with that red corner notice. But this is not the first case in which the Canadians have not taken our concerns seriously. It seems to me that the Canadians have their justice system, the law enforcement system, seems to have serious doubts about the validity of the cases that we make out and the court orders that are given out. That is why they don't seem to respond as they should respond. And hence, in a recent article that I wrote, which was carried in a national newspaper, I've suggested that there is great need now for mature diplomacy, for a real conversation on all these aspects between India and Canada, because still now it seems over the decades, starting right from the 1980s or even earlier, the Canadians and we have been talking sort of past each other. We've not engaged. Mr. Heath would be in a better position to answer this. But the Nijjar, all this was building up, and the Nijjar case provided a trigger.
All right. In fact, that's what Omar Aziz, he was a former foreign policy advisor to Trudeau, he said exactly this, that India and Canada and officials in the meetings that he was part of was talking past each other on the Khalistani issue and not necessarily to each other. But let me ask Michael Kugelman, who's also joining us, the response from the United States, it's been sort of middle of the road. Whoever's spoken publicly, whether it's Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken, they've said, yes, we're concerned about it. We'd like India to cooperate with Canada, in these investigations and bring to justice if at all such a thing has happened. No U.S. official has sort of taken a public stand or condemned India on this. And right now, in a couple of hours from now, I believe there's a meeting between Mr. Blinken and Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar there in Washington, D.C. I think the moot point, everything is sort of the focus now seems to be, Michael Kugelman, on what's the evidence. Yes, Mr. Trudeau's made these, very dramatic and very public allegations, but it's been 10 days now. What's he got to back up those allegations with?
Well, once Trudeau made the decision to go public with the allegations, he took a big risk because he knew he had to know he was going to face pressure, both domestically and in India and elsewhere, for him to put out more evidence. But I think that here in Washington, you're right. The response has been very measured. Washington has made clear that it takes these allegations seriously, and it's publicly said it wants India to cooperate with Canada in the investigation. But this is just a very difficult spot that the U.S. government is in. It doesn't want this. It doesn't want to be in this spot. The crisis is very problematic for the U.S. because it's caught between a treaty ally and a strategic partner. And quite frankly, had Canada made these allegations against pretty much any other country, you would see a very different U.S. Response, much less measured. But the New York Times, among other outlets here in the U.S., reported that the United States, through the Five Eyes Alliance, the intelligence alliance, shared information with Canada that contributed to Canada's decision to accuse India of possible involvement. So the U.S. has likely seen some of the same type of intelligence that that Canada's been able to gather as well, and yet it still remained quite measured and quite restrained in its public response. Bottom line, I think that for all this talk of how we need to see the evidence, I think that Canada and other countries would be very careful, not wanting to compromise intelligence tactics and methods used. I think that the Canadians would be very careful about putting evidence out there in the public realm. If anything, we could see some selective leaks, perhaps, to the Canadian media. There's already been some of that, but I just don't think you're going to see Ottawa come out with the evidence that everyone is asking to see. Okay,
I mean, I'm not sure how much elbow room Mr. Trudeau has now that the decision to go public, of course, was Canada's and his, and once they've done that, to be not able to provide the proof either in private. I mean, Indian officials that we've spoken to, including the foreign minister and other officials, they are categorical that no specific evidence has been shared as far as the Nijjar case is concerned. Yes, there are generalities, but you can't take action basis generalities. But let me ask Gurmant Grewal, who's a former Conservative member of Parliament in the Canadian Parliament. Were you surprised, Mr. Grewal, first of all, about the public nature of these accusations? Michael Kugelman saying that there's now some media reports suggesting that it was the US that provided the initial intel, but you don't see this often, where the Prime Minister of a country stands up in Parliament and accuses another country, another democracy, of being involved in the killing of one of its citizens. I mean, you've got to have some real smoking gun evidence to make such a public claim.
You know that for quite some time, Canada has been grappling with the issue of foreign interference. There have been an investigation going on. Hearings have been going on in House of Commons. Like everyone else, I'm also looking forward to transparency, accountability, justice, because sovereignty of Canada is important to all Canadians.
No, but the sovereignty question would apply equally to India as well. I mean, the guys who are asking for Khalistan, that's a sovereignty question against India. They want to carve this out of an existing sovereign country, right? So does that not matter?
Every country has the right to defend and protect their sovereignty. Canada is protecting its sovereignty, and it has the right that if there is a foreign interference, they need to be fully investigated, and justice, accountability, and transparency must be restored into the process. So dialogue is the solution to move forward, I guess. But for sovereignty, yes, every nation has the right to be respecting.
Again, this is exactly what the foreign minister said
and protecting its
at the UNGA a couple of days ago, that you can't cherry pick territorial integrity and sovereignty. I mean, when Russia attacks Ukraine, yes, the whole world, including India, was justifiably outraged because it was the invasion and the breach of the territorial integrity of one of the countries in the world. But when Khalistanis are asking for a a separate state out of the existing sovereign of India, then how come the territorial integrity and sovereignty argument does not apply? You can't cherry pick that. But Kashid, there is this school of thought that Justin Trudeau has been doing this essentially for domestic political reasons. His coalition depends on the NDP and on Jagmeet Singh. They have a huge Sikh Canadian vote bank that they need to cater to, and this was his way of protecting that vote bank. And he's used this argument of foreign interference. Earlier it was against China, and now perhaps to take away attention from China, because there's also been accusations of his government going soft after the Meng Wanzhou incident, the Huawei chief's daughter who was released in exchange for Canadian prisoners. He has faced accusations of going soft on China. What better way to deflect attention than to train your guns on another country?
This is highly political. Matter of fact, it's deflection on many fronts, and you've mentioned a few of them. The Prime Minister politically is in chaos right now as far as whether he will retain government here in Canada going to the next election, or we'll see some other type of government. He has a somewhat weak coalition that's in place right now. I believe the way this was handled was unfortunate. I believe that it's going to backfire on the political side of things here. I believe that there was other ways to do this. You got to remember, there's still a murder investigation that is going on by the law enforcement agency in Surrey, British Columbia, and hopefully it will lead to some type of criminal charges and prosecution against individuals. If it has to go further to other conspiracies outside of Canada, let's deal with it then. But he was certainly premature, and I believe his grandstanding in our parliament here in Canada was for political reasons, not necessarily what was the best thing to do to maintain, as we talk about, sovereignty or integrity of Canada.
Okay. I also want to take this argument forward with Vivek Kajju. I mean, India, of course, and many say, it did respond in kind. It did reciprocate measure for measure. And then, of course, there was the step of, halting all visas for Canadians. There are concerns, of course, if Canada were to take that step, that would be sort of detrimental to a lot of people who, particularly from Punjab and other states who go to Canada, whether it's for an education, whether it's for employment opportunities. Do you see, Vivek Kajju, and especially after the MEA spokesperson last week said that we want parity in diplomatic staff, the number of Canadian staff should be the same as the number of Indian staff who are in Canada, would that be a backdoor way of getting Canada to say, okay, if you don't allow us the people to process those visas, then the number of visas is going to come down?
Before that, permit me to make a couple of points, because I think they're relevant. First, I'm not concerned with Mr. Trudeau's political difficulty. He got up in his parliament for whatever reason, and he used very intemperate language and made charges for which, as of now, as you have yourself said, Zaka, he has produced no evidence, and indeed he can't produce evidence. I'll go so far as to say he can't produce evidence because there is a distinction, a basic distinction between intelligence and evidence which will stand up in a court.
Correct.
If you have collected intel through signals, sort of intelligence, then that is per se ruled out in a court of law. So, in that sense, I think let's be clear, what Mr. Trudeau was acting as the Prime Minister of Canada. His political difficulties are not for India to decide. Second, I do believe that if Mr. Trudeau had not been so intemperate and had not taken the step of expelling an Indian senior diplomat, India's response would have been more measured. But it was the sheer audacity and the sheer crassness of the allegations that Mr. Trudeau leveled that compelled India to act strongly. Now, there is a question of sovereignty being raised. And it seems to me that Mr. Trudeau has made the Nijjar case a test case of Canada's sovereignty. But as you yourself have noted, it is our Khalistan, and the advocacy of Khalistan also is a challenge to Indian sovereignty. Now, my last point. I think a parallel between the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the advocacy of Khalistan are not on all fours. For the simple reason that that has a military dimension, it has other dimensions, this doesn't. But it is nevertheless harmful for us because it revives very, very difficult and painful memories of all that transpired in the Punjab in the 1980s. And that is something that the Canadian system seems to be completely oblivious of. Besides, Canada's record, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, Canada's record of 4 decades and more of even paying heed to Indian concerns is abysmal. They seem to have a almost racist attitude towards the Indian justice system. Because, as you yourself said, there's a red corner notice, which is a standard procedure for cooperation in investigation. They don't seem to take it seriously. They seem to think that Indian judicial processes are simply not good enough for them. They have grave doubts about these. So, on the one hand, the Canadians have this difficulty, this lack of trust, and on the other hand, we are telling them that look, what you are saying is completely wrong. And this is also borne out by one other case, which is and permit me to say this because I would like our Canadian friends here, the Canadian MP and the former minister, to respond to it. And Mr. Michael Kugelman also could respond to it. When Indian service personnel apply for visas for Canada, they are asked intrusive questions which are not asked of by any other country. They are asked indeed to break their own confidentiality agreements with their government. Does Canada ask the same questions of American or British servicemen who have served in Afghanistan, or British servicemen who served in Northern Ireland? Does Canada deny them visas as it denies Indian servicemen visas or former servicemen visas? That is why I'm saying that these are actually this is actually a reason for deep Indian grievances, and this requires very mature diplomacy.
Okay, so let Kashid respond to that question.
Full airing of these matters.
Mr. Heed.
Well, let me tell you, I'm not sure what questions they do ask, but I disagree with him that we have a different attitude towards people. We certainly are respecting our law of the land, which is our Canadian charter, and we'll continue to do that. So I actually take a bit of a step back from what is being said with respect to Canadians, and your audience, sir, should realize that we're a welcoming society and will continue to be a welcoming society. Yes, there is a misstep that's going on now. It's caused a lot of conflict between Canada and India, but we need to work through that. We've got 800,000 Sikhs that reside here in Canada, and not all of them are in support of separatist type movements and all of those various things. I'm from Sikh origin, and I'm not a practicing Sikh, but again, I'm proud to be Sikh, I'm proud to be a Canadian, I'm proud of the country we have in Canada.
Okay, Michael Kugelman, you said earlier...
So please come in.
One second, Mr. Kaju, one second. Michael Kugelman, you said earlier that there were multiple media reports, including the New York Times, reporting that the initial intel on this was given by the United States. Do you reckon maybe because of that, the decision that Justin Trudeau made to go public with these allegations, do you think he would have, if not formally, certainly informally, sort of sounded out the American side before he went public, especially more so because, like you said, the initial intel was given by America?
Well, I mean, the Five Eyes Alliance is meant to be deployed in these very contexts, right? I mean, that's what the Five Eyes members do. They share intelligence, they work together and to discuss it, they consult each other. So, and I think that, quite frankly, this is why many people here in the U.S. think that these allegations have to be quite credible, in the sense that Canada does have that advantage of having some very close intelligence allies, including its southern neighbor, the United States, that can be in a very fortuitous position to help with intelligence gathering and intelligence supplying. So, one of the big questions in this whole crisis that none of us outside the Canadian government have an answer to is why did Trudeau go public with the allegations, and why did he go public with the allegations when he did? But one argument that certainly gets a lot of traction here in Washington is that he probably was inclined to go public in part because he and his government were so confident that the information that they've been able to put together was sound and credible, and that he wouldn't have wanted to go out there and go public and make a fool of himself if there was good reason to think that these allegations were not true. So, I definitely think that the Five Eyes Alliance is a very important factor in this story, just because, it's something that Canada was able to look to. to help it as it was trying to make sense of this assassination and figure out who might have been behind it. This was clearly not Canada working by itself to try to put together the information. It was able to depend on some very powerful allies, including the United States. But all that said, certainly, I mean, one could argue that there were domestic political factors in Canada that prompted him to public with the allegations. I don't really know the answer. None of us really do at the end of the day, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there were likely a variety of factors at play in this story as well. Final point is that, I think, as we all know, the Canada-India relationship had been quite tense for a number of months before the assassination of Nijjar and before Trudeau's allegations. And one could argue that perhaps Prime Minister Trudeau felt he had nothing to lose, given that the relationship with India was so bad. He had nothing to lose by going out and bringing out these allegations, perhaps in his view, to try to shame the Indian government, because indeed it's very unusual for a friend to come out with public allegations like this against another friend.
Okay. Let me ask Mr. Grewal as well before I go back to Vivekaju. I had Peter MacKay, who's a former Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Defense in a Conservative government under Stephen Harper, and he said that had the same happened under a Conservative government, they would have done it differently. They wouldn't have gone publicly. It would have been handled back channel. If you were in government, and since you're a former Conservative member of Parliament, Mr. Grewal, would a different government have handled this differently in Canada?
It goes back almost over 100 years when the situation has been simmering, starting from Kamagata Maru in 1914, when the Canadian government reacted differently to the British subjects at that time. The repercussions gave hand to or supported the independence wave in India at that time. Since then, the relationship has been rocky up and down, but there are many similarities, many positive things as well.
Okay.
India is Canada's trade partner, but Canada's total trade, India contributes only 1% of that. Canada is India's 17th largest investor. We have the huge diaspora, probably the largest diaspora in Canada is from India. We have good opportunities to share technology, to share information, trade, as well as people-to-people relationship.
Okay.
So government's approaches are different. Trudeau's approach may have been different. If I was the Prime Minister, my approach would have been different.
Okay. Let me give Vivekaju the final word. You wanted to respond, I think, to what Kashid said.
Yes, I have 3 points to make. The first is a direct question to Mr. Heath, and if he doesn't know, perhaps he can make investigation. There have been numerous cases of Americans on faulty intelligence bombing people, wedding parties in Afghanistan, and innocents, including children and women, have lost their lives. Does Canada deny visas to such American personnel, defense personnel? Does Canada think that these American service personnel are guilty of a violation of human rights? Or those who supplied them with this information are guilty of violation of human rights, and therefore intrusive questions should be asked of all American service personnel who want to come to Canada. It does that with Indians and other nationalities. So this is, if it doesn't ask American or British personnel or other European service personnel, it is guilty of discriminatory practice. Perhaps if Mr. Heath doesn't know, he can care to find out. Second is that this is a police investigation. It's a murder case. Normally, in India, the political leadership does not get involved in murder cases. It does not make statements in parliament or in the legislatures because police require evidence
All right.
And intelligence is not evidence. And finally, of course, this is an important relationship. The diaspora is there. There are other aspects of the relationship. And that is why my suggestion and recommendation is that today the need of the hour is mature diplomacy. And for that, Canada, being the party that made the first allegations, has to take the first step.
Okay,
And
we've
say
got to leave it at that. I'm
look,
completely
we
out of time.
want-
I'm really sorry, Mr. Kaju, but I'm completely out of time because we have a special interview coming up on the other side in a special segment. But thank you very much to all our guests. As we close, all I'm going to say is this. Like I said, it's not India that went public. It is Canada that went public. And when you go public, the onus is on you to cough up with the proof. So far, like I said, neither publicly nor privately has any evidence been shared, specific evidence about the Nijjar case, about possible Indian involvement in the Nijjar assassination. Let's see how the story plays out. I'm going to take a break. When we come back, ahead of the 2024 inauguration of the RamMandir, had an exclusive sit-down with the head of the construction committee and former principal secretary to the Prime Minister, Mr. Nripendra Mishra. He's given out a lot of news points. That's coming right on the other side. So there's a lot of excitement and fervor for Ram Bhaks around the country on the inauguration of the RamMandir, which is expected in January of 2024. The Prime Minister is expected to inaugurate the temple sometime in the third week of January. To get us a ringside view, a sneak peek into what Ram Bhaks across the world can expect and how the trust itself is gearing up for what is expected to be record numbers of pilgrims coming in on a daily basis. I'm joined by a very special guest here on CNN News 18. Mr. Nripendra Mishra is the chairperson of the Sri Ram Janmabhoomi Tirtha Trust. Thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. First things first, you've had many profiles in your life, many jobs you've done before as secretary to the government, as TRAI chairperson, but the chairperson of the Sri Ram Janmabhoomi Tirtha Trust. When the Prime Minister called you and said he wants you to take charge of this project, what did he tell you? What was the brief he gave you, and how did you approach this job? Because I'm sure it's very different from whatever you did.
Well, it will require a bit of clarification. I am born out of the Supreme Court judgment.
True.
The judgment said that there will be a trust which will be autonomous. And presently that trust is headed by Nriti Gopal Das ji, Swami.
Yeah.
And the General Secretary is Champat Rai ji. The judgment had also envisaged and clarified and clearly said that the construction will be in the hands of a construction committee, which will be headed by chairman of the construction committee. So I am born out of that. I am chairman of the construction committee of Ram Temple. So that is what. Now ask about
Taking up the job.
Second part. I was really not called by Honorable Prime Minister. There were inquiries made, and I had also casually talked about the possibilities because it was something very new which came from the judgment. It was not envisaged.
Correct.
So I had just mentioned this casually to the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister. It is possible that he may have conveyed it to the Prime Minister that this is what Mr. Mishra has said. The inquiry came from Home Ministry.
Okay.
Because they were responsible for the final drafting of the trust, the document which got registered. And they wanted to know if I would like to, and in the event if I am willing to accept that job, then they were keen that the draft of the trust deed must be seen by me. So all that happened before the registration took place.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more. Everybody knows that the inauguration of the temple will happen in January 2024. The Prime Minister will be attending. I know you can't give us confirmed dates, but what is the window that we are looking at?
We are talking actually not of inauguration. It is the understanding for bhakts and devotees and everybody that you provide Pran Pratishtha, consecration.
Yeah.
And that is in the idol. Let me just first explain to you that what this idol is. You see, there was already a deity which exists of Ram Lala, and that deity has been recognized as a petitioner in the judgment of the Supreme Court. So that is one which will be installed in the sanctum sanctorum.
Okay.
But in addition, there will be another which is presently being carved, and 3 different sculptors at their own risk are doing the work on the basis of artwork which the trust gave to them.
Sure.
The artwork was done by a professor of the Arts College of Banaras Hindu University. The professor was told to create a picture which will be 4 to 5 years old. It will be a standing idol. Ultimately, it has to be about 51 inches. All these things have significance because it is closely linked with the technology. Based on that artwork, the sculptors have now started doing work. I should think that the final choice by every member of the trust, that which particular work of the sculptor will be finally installed and the Pran Pratishtha ceremony would start, that decision would take place sometime by end of November.
Okay.
Or maybe middle of December. The entire ceremony of Pran Pratishtha will begin sometime after 14th of January. That is the Makar Sankranti.
Correct.
It normally should take 7 days to 10 days.
Okay.
And it will all be decided by the so-called specialists, the saints, the sages, who are responsible for this entire work of imparting the life in the idol. The day of completion will be so matched with the day of the arrival of the Prime Minister.
Okay.
We are expecting invitation has been given to Honorable Prime Minister. The office bearers of the trust have made a request to the Prime Minister's office to meet him personally and also extend the invitation, personal invitation. And we are expecting that the date will be announced sometime by first week of December about the Prime Minister's program. But with all the other engagements of his, including the Republic Day parade, etc., it is safe to presume that it will be anything between 20th of January to 25th of January or 24th of January. The final date and time, of course, has to come from him.
What about the other invitees? Who else have you called? I believe the trust has said that over 5,000 people have been invited. Who are these people?
The work for inviting people is entirely entrusted to General Secretary, who is Mr. Champat Rai ji. But the broad breakup is that roughly 2,000 saints who were involved right from the very beginning in, bringing this date to reality, they would be invited. Their representatives, different, as we call them, believers in different form of prayers and idol, they will be invited. And another list of about 5,000 or 6,000 will be the distinguished guests of different walks of the society. They will be requested to come in the ceremony. So in all, it is expected that the day the Prime Minister arrives and he would be inside the temple premises, it will be something of the order of 8,000 to 10,000 guests who will be there.
The other significant thing, and I guess the most viewer interest is in this question as to when will it be open for the public? Will it be right after the consecration ceremony itself? And how many people are you expecting? How many pilgrims are you expecting on a daily basis?
We actually gave this job of crowd management to one of the public sector undertaking of railways called RITES.
Okay.
They have done the study and they have actually surveyed the people who came in the last Ram Navami and on some of the other festivals.
Okay.
Based on that, the expectation is that roughly each day, immediately after the Pran Pratishtha, and when the Prime Minister leaves, the next day onwards, we will have devotees maybe of 1.25 lakhs to 1.50 lakhs.
So more than
coming
1
every
lakh
day.
every
Oh,
day.
yes.
And it will be open right from the next day.
Yes, it will be open to everybody from the next day.
So how is, I mean, I've been to Ayodhya before COVID, so my impressions are from back then. How is a small town like Ayodhya gearing up to service, over 1 lakh people every single day?
It is a challenging task. And of course, the Ayodhya is changing every day.
True.
The state government is doing lot of work. It has already undertaken work of about 14 kilometers around the temple, the access roads which are coming, and they will all be completed by December. But you are right, a city which has a population of fixed permanent population of 3 lakhs will have always a migratory population of 5 lakhs.
Sure.
So it means where would they stay,
Yeah.
what are they going to eat,
Yeah.
what about the civic facilities. It's a challenge. And then there are different means by which they will be coming. There will be series of commuted trains which will come.
Sure.
The airlines would have begun.
So the airport will be
operations.
functional.
Airport would be functional by October end and November, middle of November.
Okay.
So we are expecting that the commercial airlines would fly in by middle of December. So that will be, then the obvious road link is there. So all this taken together, it sort of has its own problems.
Yeah.
Where would you park the buses? Where would you park the other four-wheelers? Where are they going to stay? Are they going to walk 2 kilometers to the temple?
Yeah.
Are they going to walk 1 kilometer? But what about elderly?
Yeah,
What
true.
kind of facility? Are we going to have shuttle services? So there is a very strong group under the Chief Secretary of Uttar Pradesh, which has been formed to monitor the entire issue of providing, facilitating comforts to the devotees who enter the temple.
So after this, do you expect some kind of a corridor, if you will, between Kashi, Ayodhya and Mathura, because these are the 3 holiest sites for Hindus? Do you expect, have you already been requested to head that project?
I think those who will come to Ayodhya, perhaps they will like to go to Varanasi, definitely.
Sure.
The natural corridor is Prayagraj, which is Allahabad, then Kashi and Ayodhya. This. And on the western front, of course, is Mathura. So the natural catchment is, and the link is between Ayodhya and Kashi. That's going to happen. And we were told that in Kashi, similar trend has happened. Every day,
Yeah.
a new crowd and devotee, 50 to 75,000 people are coming. It is on that basis only that we thought 1.25 lakhs is going to be the normal number, at least for next 3 to 4 months.
Sure. You said earlier that, your position was born out of the Supreme Court verdict. I just want your thoughts on this because of the complex history of the movement itself, and there was violence as well. What would you say to those people that, because of the complex history and the political nature of it, what would you say to them, as we approach this consecration day, the opening of the Ram temple?
Actually, that mood was set by Prime Minister's message. When the Supreme Court judgment came, Honorable Prime Minister said there should be no misplaced euphoria. There has to be no winner, there has to be no loser. And honestly, I have been visiting Ayodhya. I mean, perhaps next visit of mine will be the 50th visit to Ayodhya that I would have made. And in all these months and years that I have been there is no such thing acrimonious atmosphere. There is no community divide. Everybody accepts that the temple is here. Everybody accepts that the mosque is being constructed about 25 kilometers away. And there is no feeling at all that something was demolished. Earlier something was demolished. There is a historical game of demolition and reconstruction. All those things, it's history. It's forgotten. That I have often recognized that was one single contribution of the judiciary. The judgment which they gave in November of 2019, it brought down the temperature of the country immediately to normal. And since then, the issue is dead.
Were you surprised when the verdict came and there was no visible fallout to the verdict? Yes, a few political parties made some noise about it, but at the level of the people, it's like, okay, either this is a chapter of history that we want to put behind us and move forward, or maybe all this anticipated fears were misplaced.
I think the first thing, of course, is the citizens have tremendous faith in judiciary. Even during the dispute, everyone said whatever is the judicial pronouncement, we'll abide by that.
Correct.
We'll accept that.
Correct.
So that is the first. And secondly, over the years, it was almost taken now as accepted fact that there will be temple and there will be a mosque. And that is what has happened.
Okay. Last couple of questions. I want to ask you about the funding, and there's been some controversy around that as well. How is the temple building funded? Is it entirely by devotees, by Ram Bhaks, or is there some government involvement as well? And
there is no money from government.
Zero.
Either of the state government
or
of the central government.
Okay.
Even let me give you, when we are buying wood for the construction of doors, we had approached the Forest Corporation of Maharashtra. There were certain requests made that the corporation may like to gift it for the temple, but it was denied. It was not accepted.
Okay.
The simple principle is it will be built by the donation of the devotees. And roughly the collection has been of the order of 3,500 crores. The collection has come from about 4 lakh villages, or little more than 4 lakh villages, where the individually people were contacted. And from the coupon of rupees 10 to coupon of rupees 1,000 and rupees 2,000 and beyond, all that was utilized. And it is a matter of great satisfaction that when roughly I would imagine that about 25,000 sevaks were requested to contact the villages and the people in the community. They were given the coupon and they returned the coupon, they returned the accounts, and then 100% audit has been done. 100% audit has been done.
So roughly how many people do you think have contributed, donated?
Oh, it's definitely families I am talking about. More than 5 lakh families.
More than 5 lakh families.
Do you also? I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you also
the number otherwise will be more.
It might be more, but at the very least 5 lakh families. Do you also want to speak to the allegations that had surfaced some time back about corruption and misuse of funds and so on and so forth?
No. There was no such allegation ever about the misuse of funds. What was said was that certain land was purchased. And that land, either it was paid on exorbitant price.
Yes, correct.
Or it was a Nazul land which was bought again. Now the problem, it's a fact that if you really want to see Ayodhya records, almost entire Ayodhya is Nazul land. So anybody who is settled there for the last 100 years, perhaps if you scratch, you will say you are occupying, you are an encroacher. But the fact of the life is that. Now we urgently wanted some little land. It is, if we have got, let us say 71 acres.
Yeah.
As a result of the purchase of the new land, our total area will not be more than 75 acres.
Sure.
So the total purchase is not of the order of more than 4 acres. Okay. And all that which was bought, it was said either that it was an Azul land. Yes, we recognize that, but we had to buy it. And after all, even in Vishwanath temple,
Yeah.
when the houses were bought,
Correct. Yeah.
the records were not checked, the people were given compensation because they were living there for 100 years.
Correct.
And this was then dismantled. So in such kind of settlements, these things do happen, but the inquiry was entrusted to the commissioner of the division, and he has given a certificate that there has been no irregularity in the purchase.
All right, and one final word, because this is in the news, and since you are the chairperson of the trust that's building the temple, this whole controversy around the Sanatan Dharma, what is your take on that? Is there a misinterpretation of the phrase, or and especially speaking as the chairperson of the trust that's building the Ram temple, what is your understanding of?
You see, whatever, it will be very personal opinion.
Of course.
Because it has nothing to do with my construction committee chairman.
Correct.
My own opinion is that Sanatan is a way of life. The entire country is, in some ways or the other, is Sanatani in that kind of a spirit. What does the Sanatan mean? It only means that you love your human beings, you worship your God, whom you believe in, and toleration. That is what the Sanatan tells you. So, as far as my personal belief is concerned, that is a fact that I believe in Sanatan Dharma, and I also believe that it has provided stability to this country. And the second thing, let me assure you that the word and the controversy doesn't touch Ayodhya. Not a single man there would even bother about the controversy of Sanatan. He has his life, he has to look after. He knows that his economy is going to grow any times more, perhaps nth number more than what before, and he is happy with that.
But this whole surround sound, the noise around it, it's on television debates, it's on front pages of newspapers, has not touched the temple down.
I can assure you it is only there.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Nripendra Mishra, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
Thank you.
They should be taken into custody so that their activities could be controlled, because remember the kind of modus operandi that is being undertaken over here, as NIA had mentioned in its charge sheet, that it is very similar to how the D gang used to operate in the 90s itself, where protection money was taken from businessmen, small and large businessmen, and along with that protection money was also taken from the film industry, in this case the Punjabi film industry and the Punjabi music industry. Now the people who are controlling this are actually sitting outside in Canada and in parts of Europe and North America as well. So the money that is taken from here is sent to them through the Hawala channels, and that money is returned back to India by the way of Pakistan, in which drugs and arms and ammunitions are being sent inside India so that the peace could be disrupted. So this is the kind of modus operandi that is underway, and hence the NIA and the Indian agencies, and in fact the Punjab police is also now trying to make sure that all these people are taken into custody so that this entire nexus and this entire modus operandi is brought to the ground.
Right, Anshul. Anshul, do stay with us. Right now, we also have Arunima joining us on the broadcast. Arunima, very good morning to you. Well, as Anshul was describing what exactly regarding their operations in India, if you could just take our viewers through how exactly their operations, how exhaustive their operations were, and they existed across nations, and also the kind of the way they were receiving fundings to execute these activities.
So the Lawrence Vishnoi gang, the Kala Jathedi gang, the Ashdalla gang, all these people were into the extortion business in Punjab and Haryana. They extort from contractors, from those who are in the liquor business, from doctors, engineers, other professionals, So the main source of money is extortion. Then they are also in the drugs business, illegally selling drugs in Punjab. The source of that drug is Pakistan, is what investigators have found out. In recent times, we have seen drones dropping narcotics consignment. So when you sell those drugs in the market, that becomes a source of income as well. In return for these drug consignment and sophisticated weapons, you carry out targeted killings on behalf of Khalistani elements, and that's why you've seen killing of RSS Shiv Sena members, killing of Dera Sachastra members. Some Nirankari Sikhs have also been targeted. So that is the way the nexus between organized crime and terrorism operates. This money is then, sent to at least two people have been named by the NIA in its charge sheet. One, Manish Bhandari in Thailand, runs a resort. Evidence has been found that he has often harbored these gangsters, routed their hawala money to Thailand. And there's also evidence that the money goes back to Canada and gets invested in yachts, in expensive movies, and also in the Canadian Premier League. So that's the route that the money is taking from Punjab all the way to Canada, and then from Canada back into Punjab. It's a circuitous route that is being taken through Hawala, where both the organized crime network and the Khalistani extremists are involved, are hand in glove.
Right, Arunima. Arunima and Anshul, thank you very much for bringing us all those details, and we will keep a close watch on this NIA crackdown, exhaustive crackdown that is ongoing right now. NIA crackdown on the K nexus that is ongoing, and right now what we are learning is the ISI behind the Nijjar murder. This is a deep dive that we are taking into the ISI. This is intel source that is coming into CNN News 18, so it's an exclusive wherein Canadian authorities advise Nijjar over visiting the Gurudwara. This is the information that we are learning. Then the Canadian authorities had advised Nijjar not to be seen in public. That is another crucial piece of information. Canadian authorities supported Pakistan. ISI gave access to killers. These are the information we are receiving regarding ISI links to Nijjar and access to killers. This is what we are getting. This is the particular information that we are getting. And we have Anshul Singh joining us on the broadcast. Anshul, a very good morning to you. Welcoming to you regarding the NIA crackdown that is ongoing right now. It has been a multi-state crackdown. What more details are we gathering at this point, especially with relation to the ISI links?
So yes, the NIA is making sure that the entire backbone of this terror gangster nexus that is prevailing in Punjab should be broken down, because remember the kind of diplomatic war that has started between India and Canada. It is very, very unlikely that Canada is anywhere going to go ahead and stop these people who are sitting in Canada, getting a safe haven in Canada, and actually trying to disrupt peace out here, especially in the state of Punjab and in other parts of North India. Now these raids happened yesterday at least 53 locations across North India and in 6 states itself. In that, several people have already been taken into custody, and not only the arrest that has happened is important, but also the people who have been arrested, some incriminating documents have also been seized by the NIA, and along with that arms and ammunitions have also been taken into custody by the NIA. So yes, this is being seen as a massive crackdown, because remember over the last 1 year, several such raids, more than 7 such raids have already taken place by the NIA, because now the focus of the Indian government and the Indian authorities is to make sure that the entire backbone out here that is prevailing, the overground workers of these gangs and gangsters who are out here in India and is trying to disrupt peace out here in India, they should be taken into custody so that their activities could be controlled. Because remember the kind of modus operandi that is being undertaken over here, as NIA had mentioned in its charge sheet, that it is very similar to how the D gang used to operate in the 90s itself, where protection money was taken from businessmen, small and large businessmen, and along with that protection money was also taken from the film industry.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Violence has flared up in the Indian state of Manipur again. This is after photos of 2 dead students went viral. The internet has been shut down. One more time, as India tries to resolve this crisis, intelligence